Welcome to Bedtime Noir, where unsettling mysteries and quiet truths unfold as the world drifts off to sleep. Tonight, I'll guide you through three dark tales, each inspired by true crime themes and crafted to help your mind slow down, even as the story stirs something deeper. Get comfortable, let the rain fall, and if you listen closely, you just might hear what was never meant to be found. Story 1. The Vanishing at Raven's Peak. The morning Ethan Cole disappeared was unusually quiet. The wind, usually a restless spirit in the mountain valleys of Raven's Peak, had stilled, and the ancient pine trees stood like silent, watchful sentries along the rugged hiking trail. A thin mist, clinging to the lower slopes, promised a clear, crisp day, but also held a lingering chill that bit at exposed skin. Ethan, a 34-year-old outdoor enthusiast and freelance writer, paused at the trailhead, his breath pluming in the cool air. He pulled out his phone, a rugged, waterproof model, and began recording a voice memo at precisely 6:32 a.m., a habit he had developed for documenting his solo treks, a digital breadcrumb trail for his sister, Jenna, who always worried. Clear skies, his voice, surprisingly steady, echoed in the stillness. Temperatures cool, perfect. Just left base camp. Should reach Ridgepoint by noon, maybe a little after. Got a good feeling about this one. If you find this and I'm not back, well, tell my sister I was chasing the story. The real story. That was the last trace of him. Ethan was no stranger to solo hikes. His passport bore stamps from remote corners of the globe. He had conquered the jagged, windswept peaks of Patagonia, written feature articles on forgotten paths in Eastern Europe, and once camped along Iceland's isolated coast for 12 days, documenting the eerie beauty of its volcanic landscapes. He was meticulous, prepared, and possessed an almost uncanny ability to navigate the wilderness. But Raven's Peak was different, not just in its unforgiving terrain, a labyrinth of sheer cliffs, dense, ancient forests, and sudden, treacherous ravines, but in its reputation. Locals in the nearest town, Oakhaven, spoke of odd disappearances stretching back generations, whispered stories of strange, geometric markings carved into trees, and chilling rumors of a silent figure in a black cloak that watched from the impenetrable depths of the woods. To most, it was folklore, campfire tales spun for tourists or cautionary legends for wayward children. But Ethan wasn't most people. He had a journalist's insatiable curiosity, a thirst for the hidden narratives that lay beneath the surface of the mundane. His fascination with Raven's Peak had begun months ago, not with a local legend, but with a cryptic forum post. Anonymous, riddled with typos and broken English, it had mentioned the ones who protect the mountain, and that only those who are invited return. That single, unsettling thread had sent him spiraling down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, coded blogs, and blurry, pixelated images of what looked suspiciously like symbols carved into tree bark. He'd spent weeks cross-referencing, mapping, and interviewing reluctant locals, piecing together a mosaic of fragmented whispers about a secretive group, sometimes called the Sentinels of the Peak, said to guard ancient knowledge or perhaps something far more tangible, buried deep within the mountain's heart. He'd dismissed most of it as fanciful, but a kernel of truth, a persistent echo, had remained. When Ethan didn't check in by nightfall, Jenna, his younger sister and closest confidant, felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. She knew Ethan could be late. He often was, lost in the beauty of a sunset or the challenge of a difficult ascent, but something in her gut told her this wasn't like him. He was rigorous about his check-ins, especially on solo trips. She waited another hour, then two, before finally calling the Raven's Peak Ranger Station. The next morning, a search team was dispatched. Ranger Luis Mendoza, a grizzled veteran with over 2 decades of mountain patrol experience, led the initial ground sweep. They found Ethan's car at the trailhead, neatly parked, locked, and undisturbed, a silent testament to his meticulous nature. His last GPS ping, a faint signal from his satellite communicator, came from about 5 miles into the dense forest, near a notoriously difficult section known as the Whispering Pines. That's where they began their grid search, a dozen rangers and volunteers fanning out, their radios crackling with terse updates. By day 3, the search had yielded little. The forest seemed to swallow sound, and the sheer density of the undergrowth made progress agonizingly slow. Then, late in the afternoon, a younger ranger, Mark Jensen, stumbled upon it, Ethan's camp. It was half-packed, as if he'd been interrupted mid-task. A still warm fire pit, embers glowing faintly beneath a thin layer of ash, suggested he'd been there very recently. And near the dying fire, half buried in the ashes, lay his hiking journal, partially burned, its pages curled and blackened at the edges. A chilling silence descended upon the search party as they stared at the remnants, a tangible sign that something had gone terribly wrong. The journal was the first real clue, a tangible thread in a tapestry of unsettling unknowns. Rangers carefully retrieved the damaged, smoke-scented pages, handling them with the reverence of archaeologists unearthing an ancient relic. They passed the fragile bundle to Claire Morin, the local archivist and an amateur historian whose reputation for meticulous research into Raven's Peak's lore was almost as legendary as the mountain's own myths. Claire, a woman in her late 40s with keen, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetually curious mind, was well known in Oakhaven for her deep dives into everything from early settler diaries and forgotten logging routes to obscure Cold War installations rumored to be buried deep in the region. Claire laid the charred pages out on a protective sheet in her quiet, dust-mote-filled office, the scent of old paper and wood polish heavy in the air. She examined the remaining entries, deciphering Ethan's hurried, often illegible handwriting. Most were standard hiking notes, trail conditions, wildlife sightings, weather observations. But then a passage stood out, scrawled with an almost frantic energy. Symbols are real, not just folklore. Found 3 within 20 yards, all facing east. Not random. It's a pattern. I'm close. The old stories, they're not just stories. There's a purpose, a design. It's like they're guiding me, or warning me. Can't tell which yet. Feeling watched. The silence is unnatural. No birds. No wind. Just waiting. Accompanying the text were sketches, crude but distinct representations of spirals, intersecting triangles, and a crescent moon with 3 slashes across it. Claire recognized them instantly. These weren't random doodles. These were glyphs, symbols she'd encountered in her own research, believed to be tied to the sentinels of the peak. This alleged secret society, a clandestine group of naturalists and survivalists, was rumored to have lived off-grid in the region since the early 1900s, perhaps even earlier. Though there was never any hard evidence of their existence beyond fragmented oral histories and a few obscure, almost mythical references in century-old town records, whispers about them had persisted like a low hum beneath the surface of Oakhaven life. They were said to protect the mountain, not from casual hikers or loggers, but from discovery, from exploitation, from the encroaching modern world. The next day, armed with Claire's insights, the search party spotted more symbols. They were carved deep into the bark of ancient trees, just as Ethan had drawn them, precise, deliberate, almost ritualistic. But what unnerved the team most wasn't the carvings themselves. It was the pervasive, unnatural silence that accompanied them. Not a single bird call broke the stillness. No rustling leaves disturbed the air. No animal tracks marred the soft forest floor. The deeper they ventured into the marked territory, the more profound and oppressive the silence became, making the hairs on their arms stand on end. It felt as if the forest itself was holding its breath, watching them. Then came the sighting. On day 5, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange and purple, Ranger Luis Mendoza's voice crackled over the radio, unusually strained. Saw a figure, black clothing, standing perfectly still at the edge of the clearing. About 6 feet tall, maybe taller. Turned away as soon as I looked, gone in seconds. No sound, just vanished. He sounded shaken. And Luis Mendoza, a man who had faced down grizzlies and navigated blizzards without a flicker of fear, was not easily shaken. A cold dread spread through the search party. They converged on Luis's location, finding only undisturbed undergrowth where he claimed the figure had stood. They followed tracks, deep, deliberate boot prints, surprisingly clear in the damp soil, but they ended abruptly at the edge of a shallow creek. No prints on the other side, no signs of a struggle, just water, and the unsettling, profound stillness of the forest. The air grew heavy with suspicion and fear, and tensions within the search party began to rise. Some muttered about turning back, about the mountain not wanting to give up its secrets. Claire, increasingly obsessed with the case and driven by a historian's instinct for uncovering buried truths, joined the next day's search team. She wasn't trained for field work, her usual domain being dusty archives and fragile manuscripts, but her encyclopedic knowledge of the mountain's layout, its forgotten trails, and its deep-seated lore made her an invaluable guide. Ranger Mendoza, though still unnerved by his sighting, grudgingly acknowledged her expertise. They followed the symbols, always east-facing, a deliberate directional marker, for hours, pushing deeper into a section of the forest that felt increasingly ancient and untouched. The trees grew taller here, their branches interwoven into a dense canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor, creating an almost perpetual twilight. The silence was absolute, broken only by their own footsteps and the occasional, unsettling snap of a twig. Finally, they reached an outcrop overlooking a deep, mist-shrouded gorge. The air here was colder, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp rock and hidden things. There, nestled almost invisibly in the sheer cliffside, was a cave. It was small, its entrance partially obscured by hanging moss and a cluster of gnarled junipers, easily missed by the untrained eye. But it was unmistakably marked by the same crescent/symbol, carved meticulously into the rock face beside its opening. Inside, the air was frigid, carrying a faint, acrid smell of old smoke. The floor was surprisingly dry, a testament to the cave's hidden nature, and the walls were covered in a thin layer of soot, as if it had once been lived in, perhaps for generations. Claire's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing crude shelves carved into the rock and a small, flat stone that served as a hearth. There was no sign of Ethan, no blood, no clothing, no struggle, just absence and presence, a lingering, almost palpable sense that the cave remembered him, that he had been here recently, perhaps even stayed. Claire found a few artifacts, a rusted, antique lantern, its glass cracked, but its wick still present, and what appeared to be a handmade pendant, intricately carved from a piece of dark, polished wood, bearing the exact spiral symbol Ethan had drawn in his journal. It felt ancient, yet somehow recently touched. The team searched the cave thoroughly, finding nothing else. Frustrated, Ranger Mendoza decided to pull back before nightfall. "It's getting too dark, Claire. We've covered everything here. We'll come back tomorrow with more gear." But Claire had a feeling. Something primal, a deep pull that resonated with the ancient stories she'd spent her life studying. She lingered, watching the last of the search team disappear into the trees, their voices fading into the oppressive silence. She had to know more. She had to understand. She stayed late that night, alone at the outcrop, the vast, star-dusted sky stretching above her like an inky canvas. The moon, a sliver of silver, cast long, dancing shadows. She pulled out her own phone, the screen a tiny beacon in the vast darkness, and recorded a voice memo, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "I don't think Ethan was taken. I think he chose to stay, or was convinced to. The Sentinels, if they're real, don't abduct. They recruit. They observe. They wait. They offer something. Knowledge. Peace. A different way of life." He was looking for something beyond the ordinary. He was chasing the story. What if the story invited him in? Just before dawn, the first hints of pale light touching the eastern horizon, she returned to the base camp, exhausted but invigorated by a terrifying new theory. But something was different. Her journal, the one she had brought to compare symbols, filled with her own meticulous notes and hypotheses, was missing from her tent. It had been neatly placed on her cot just hours before. In its place was a small, folded piece of bark. On it, carved carefully with a sharp, precise tool, was the crescent symbol, and beneath it, a single word, "Closer." A cold shiver ran down her spine. They knew she was here. They were watching, and they were communicating. The official investigation into Ethan Cole's disappearance eventually concluded without answers. Despite extensive searches, aerial surveys, and even a brief, half-hearted involvement from state police, no remains were found. No confirmed sightings of Ethan or the mysterious hooded figure ever materialized. Just his half-packed camp, his partially burned journal, the enigmatic cave, and the pervasive, unsettling silence of the mountain. Ethan Cole was declared missing, presumed dead, a tragic footnote in the annals of Oak Haven's local mysteries. The town, accustomed to its legends, simply added another one to the collection. Claire Morin, however, could not let it go. The word "closer" carved into the bark had ignited a new, fierce determination within her. She continued her research, quietly, meticulously, now with a chilling awareness that she was being observed. Her library became her sanctuary, filled with maps, historical texts, and her own expanding collection of Sentinel lore. She began to notice patterns that had previously eluded her. Satellite images of the region, which she painstakingly cross-referenced with old logging maps, revealed faint, almost invisible trails not mapped on any public records, pathways that seemed to connect the very locations where the symbols were found. Old radio frequencies, previously considered dead or static-filled, came alive late at night with soft, rhythmic pulses like a heartbeat echoing through the airwaves. And once, during a solo hike to re-examine the cave, she swore she saw someone watching her from across the ridge, unmoving, silent, a dark silhouette against the setting sun, face hidden beneath a deep, dark hood. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't report it. What would she say? That a ghost was watching her? Instead, she wrote an article, titled "The Vanishing at Raven's Peak: Myth, Madness, or Invitation." It was published in a small, independent online journal specializing in regional mysteries. It gained unexpected attention, drawing online theorists, survivalist bloggers, and even amateur cryptographers who tried to decode the symbols. But it also brought warnings. Claire began receiving anonymous messages, not on Bark this time, but via encrypted emails and untraceable burner phones. The messages were short, cold, and unervingly precise. "Leave it. You're close. Stop digging. Some truths are best left buried." She didn't. The warnings only fueled her resolve. She felt a connection to Ethan, a shared pursuit of a truth that the mountain guarded fiercely. She knew she was risking something, but the historian in her, The part that craved understanding wouldn't allow her to stop. Then, one day, she found a small, unmarked wooden box on her doorstep. It was plain, unvarnished, and felt strangely warm to the touch. Inside, Ethan's voice recorder, the very one she had heard mentioned in his last memo. Her hands trembled as she found the last file, time-stamped 2 days after his disappearance. She pressed play. The recording was faint, filled with the rustle of leaves and distant, echoing sounds of the forest. Ethan's voice, however, was clearer than she expected, though laced with an unnerving calm, almost a reverence. They know I'm here. They watch, but they don't speak. Not in words, not like us. It's a different kind of communication. I think I understand now. The world outside, it's noise. Here, it's truth. A profound, ancient truth. They showed me things. Paths unseen. Knowledge forgotten. I'm not missing. I'm becoming. The recording ended abruptly, replaced by the faint, rhythmic pulse she'd heard on the old radio frequencies. Claire sat there, the recorder heavy in her hand, a profound sense of awe and terror washing over her. Ethan hadn't been taken by force. He had been converted. He had found what he was looking for, and it had transformed him. Claire's research intensified, now driven by a new, chilling understanding. The Sentinels weren't just a reclusive group. They were an ideology, a way of life, perhaps even a consciousness intertwined with the mountain itself. She theorized that they didn't operate through traditional means, but through subtle influence, guiding those who were ready and deterring those who were not. The symbols, the silence, the hooded figure, these were all tools of observation and communication, a complex language understood by few. She discovered an old, forgotten diary entry from a 19th century prospector who had ventured too deep into Raven's Peak. He spoke of the mountain's breath, a low hum that could drive men mad, and the silent watchers who appeared only to those who were lost, offering a choice: return to the world or stay and become part of the mountain. The prospector had chosen to return, but his entries hinted at a profound, unsettling peace he had found in their presence, a temptation he barely resisted. Claire began to see the mountain differently, not as a collection of rocks and trees, but as a living entity, with the Sentinels as its custodians, its immune system. Ethan had been drawn to its truth, and now Claire was too. But she was an observer, not a participant. She had a life, a sister, a world outside the peak. One evening, while cross-referencing old land deeds, she found a series of small, unmarked parcels of land deep within the peak's most inaccessible areas. These parcels had never been developed, never sold, remaining in the names of various trusts and shell corporations that dissolved and reformed every few decades. It was a legal labyrinth designed for perpetual anonymity. This was where the Sentinels likely resided, moving through the land they protected like shadows. She decided to make one last, deeper foray into the mountain, not to search for Ethan, but to seek understanding. She left a detailed itinerary and a sealed letter for Jenna, to be opened only if she didn't return. This time, she carried no voice recorder, no journal, only a small backpack with essentials and a profound sense of purpose. She followed the subtle signs she had learned to recognize: a broken branch pointing a certain way, a cluster of stones arranged in an unusual pattern, the faint scent of wood smoke carried on a non-existent breeze. She was no longer looking for symbols, but for the absence of human interference, the places where the mountain's truth was purest. She found herself at the edge of a vast, ancient grove of redwoods, trees so enormous and old they seemed to touch the sky. The light here was almost sacred, filtering through the colossal canopy in golden shafts. In the center of the grove, a clearing, and in the clearing, a single, rough-hewn stone altar. On it, a collection of small, polished stones, arranged in the familiar spiral pattern. Suddenly, a rustle. Claire froze. From the shadows of the ancient redwoods, figures emerged. Not one, but several. They were cloaked, their faces obscured by deep hoods, just as Luis Mendoza had described. They moved with an unnerving grace, silent as specters, their footsteps making no sound on the forest floor. They surrounded the clearing, forming a silent circle around Claire. Her heart hammered, but a strange calm settled over her. There was no aggression in their stance, no menace, only stillness. Observation. One figure, taller than the others, stepped forward. Its hood remained deep, but Claire felt an intense, ancient gaze upon her. A voice, deep and resonant, seemed to emanate not from the figure's mouth, but from the very air around them, a collective whisper of the wind through the pines. You seek truth, Claire Morin. You have come closer than any outsider in generations. Claire, finding her voice, asked, Ethan Cole, is he here? Did he join you? The voice responded. Ethan Cole sought understanding. He found it. He chose a path. The mountain offers many paths. Some lead away. Some led within. What is this place? She asked, gesturing around the ancient grove. What are you? We are the guardians. The memory of the mountain. We preserve what is pure, what is forgotten. The world outside it consumes. It forgets. We remember. We protect. Protect from what? From the noise. From the greed. From the destruction. Those who are ready, who seek true stillness, true knowledge, are welcomed. Those who would harm are turned away or lost. Claire thought of the missing hikers, the ones whose gear was found but no bodies. Are you responsible for the disappearances? The voice seemed to sigh, a sound like wind through dry leaves. The mountain is responsible. It chooses. We are merely its hands. Ethan Cole chose to become part of the silence. He found his truth. Claire looked around at the silent, cloaked figures. There was no threat, no demand, only an offer, a choice, the same choice Ethan had faced. I understand, Claire said, her voice barely a whisper. But my path is different. I must tell the story. The world needs to know. The tall figure tilted its head, a gesture of ancient wisdom. The world will hear what it is ready to hear. Some truths are whispers. Some are echoes. Go, Claire Morin. Tell your story. But remember the silence. It watches. It listens. And it waits. With that, the figures began to recede, melting back into the shadows of the redwoods as silently as they had appeared. Claire stood alone in the clearing, the scent of pine and ancient earth filling her lungs, a profound sense of wonder and fear warring within her. She had found them. She had spoken to them, and she was allowed to leave. Claire returned to Oakhaven, a changed woman. She didn't tell anyone about her encounter in the redwood grove. How could she? It sounded like madness. Instead, she poured her new understanding into her work. She wrote a series of articles, not just about Ethan, but about the history of Raven's Peak, its unique ecosystem, the forgotten wisdom of indigenous peoples who once revered the mountain. She wove in the subtle hints of the Sentinels, framing them as a philosophical concept, a metaphor for the mountain's protective spirit rather than a literal group. Her articles resonated. They sparked conversations about environmental preservation, about respecting nature, about finding stillness in a noisy world. She became a respected voice, a guardian of the mountain's story in her own way. But the silence of the peak still called to her. She still received the anonymous, encrypted messages, though now they were fewer and less threatening. Sometimes they contained only a single word, watched, or understood. The official investigation into Ethan Cole remained closed. His family grieved, but eventually moved on, accepting the mountain's mystery. Jenna visited Claire once, years later. You never stopped looking, did you? She asked, her eyes searching Claire's. Claire just smiled sadly. Some things you don't find, Jenna. You just learn to live with them. She continued her hikes, but now with a different purpose. She wasn't searching. She was observing. She would still find the occasional crescent symbol carved into bark or a spiral of stones on a remote trail. She would still feel the profound, unnatural silence descend upon her in certain parts of the forest. And sometimes she would catch a fleeting glimpse of a dark, hooded figure in the periphery of her vision, always just out of reach, always watching. She never reported these sightings. She understood now. The sentinels were not a threat to her. They were a constant, silent reminder of the profound, ancient power that lay hidden within Raven's Peak. To this day, hikers report odd symbols in the woods of Raven's Peak. Whispers of hooded figures continue, often dismissed as backcountry hallucinations or the mind playing tricks after days in isolation. The legends persist, woven into the fabric of Oak Haven, a cautionary tale for those who venture too deep. But every once in a while, a hiker goes missing. Their gear is found. Their phones are dead. No bodies. No signs of struggle. Just silence. And sometimes, carved into bark, near the last known location, is the crescent symbol. And the word, closer. The mountain keeps its secrets. And its guardians remain, silent and unseen, forever watching, forever waiting for those who seek the truth, and for those who are ready to become part of the silence. The story of Raven's Peak is not one of a single vanishing, but of an ongoing, ancient dialogue between humanity and the untamed wild, a dialogue that sometimes, in its profound stillness, claims a soul. Story 2. The Whispering Walls. Mark Ellison hadn't planned to move to Greystone. His life in the city had imploded with the quiet, devastating finality of a messy breakup and a job shift that allowed him to work remotely. He needed a reset, a clean slate, a place where the echoes of his past wouldn't follow him. The quiet town on the edge of nowhere, with its sleepy main street and distant, hazy mountains, seemed like the perfect antidote. Small, affordable, peaceful, it checked every box on his mental checklist for escape. When he found a third-floor unit in the Bellman Building, a pre-war apartment complex with thick, sound-dampening walls, creaky, resonant floors, and a vaguely romantic air of faded grandeur, he signed the lease without thinking twice. It felt like stepping into a forgotten era, a place where time had slowed to a gentle, almost imperceptible crawl. The realtor, a stiff woman named Mrs. Albright with a faint perfume of lavender and an almost palpable aura of anxiety, had offered a tight, almost apologetic smile as she handed him the heavy brass keys. "People say it's a little quirky," she'd murmured, her gaze darting around the high-ceilinged living room. "But it has good bones. Solid. And the rent is a steal for the space." Mark had nodded, already distracted by the way the afternoon light filtered through the tall, arched windows, painting stripes across the worn hardwood floor. The first few nights passed uneventfully. Mark unpacked his meager belongings, mostly books and a few worn records, made instant noodles on his portable stove, and explored the sleepy town. The people were polite, if distant, their faces etched with the quiet resignation of small-town life. The building itself was mostly quiet, save for the occasional clang of old pipes protesting their age, or the faint, melancholic strains of jazz drifting up from 2 floors below. He liked it. The silence was a balm to his frayed nerves, a stark contrast to the relentless hum of city life he had left behind. He felt, for the first time in months, a fragile sense of peace. Until the 4th night. At around 2:14 a.m., he woke up abruptly, his heart thudding against his ribs. He lay still, disoriented, listening. And then he heard them. Whispers. At first, he thought it was coming from the hallway. A late-night argument, maybe, or a couple returning home. He swung his legs out of bed, his bare feet meeting the cool floorboards, and pressed his ear to the solid oak door. Silence. Absolute, profound silence. He frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. Had he dreamed it? Then he heard it again, behind him, from the wall. A soft, breathy whisper, like a voice pushing through layers of plaster and decades of dust. It was indistinct, a murmur of sound rather than discernible words, but undeniably there. A chill, not from the cool night air, prickled his skin. He turned on all the lights, flooding the apartment with a harsh, artificial glow. He checked every corner, peered under the bed, even opened the closet door. Nothing. The next day, he wrote it off as a dream, a lingering echo of the stress he'd been under. His mind playing tricks. But the whispers returned. Night after night, always between 2 and 3 a.m. Always from the same wall, the one behind his bed, bordering the empty unit next door, apartment 3B. The sounds grew more persistent, more distinct, though still maddeningly unintelligible. Sometimes they sounded like a child humming a tune just out of recognition, a lullaby perhaps. Other times, a faint, almost imperceptible scratching, like nails on wood, would accompany the whispers, a sound that made his teeth ache. He tried asking his neighbors, casually at first. Mrs. Henderson, a sweet elderly woman who lived across the hall, just smiled vaguely. "Oh, the Bellman building has its quirks, dear. Old buildings always do." Mr. Davies, the jazz enthusiast downstairs, just grunted, "Never heard a thing, son. You sure you're sleeping well?" No one else seemed to hear anything. Some even avoided eye contact when he brought up the building's history, their smiles tightening, their gazes shifting away. It was as if a silent, unspoken agreement existed among them to ignore certain truths. Mark started noticing other things. Strange cold spots that would appear and vanish in the air near that particular wall, even when the rest of the apartment was warm. And the wallpaper, a faded floral pattern, seemed to be peeling more aggressively near the baseboard of that wall, almost as if something behind it was trying to push through. He found himself staring at it for long stretches, a growing sense of unease coiling in his stomach. The peace he had sought in Greystone was slowly, insidiously, being eroded. By the end of the second week, Mark wasn't sleeping well. His eyes were perpetually shadowed, his movements sluggish. The whispers had grown from faint murmurs to a persistent, almost urgent presence. Sometimes they sounded like a woman crying, a soft, heartbroken sob that echoed in the quiet hours. Other times, like a child giggling, a sound that should have been joyful but instead filled him with a profound dread. He tried recording the sounds with his phone, leaving it on his bedside table, but they never picked up. When he played it back, there was only static, dead silence. Only he seemed to hear them. It was as if the sounds existed on a frequency only his mind could perceive, or perhaps only his mind was meant to perceive. He started digging. Not literally, not yet. He began with the town library, a quaint, dusty building that smelled of old paper and forgotten stories. The Bellman building, it turned out, had a long and surprisingly tragic history. It had been built in the early 1900s, a grand dame in its youth, but had seen its share of sorrows. And then he found it. A brittle, yellowed newspaper clipping from 1986. The headline screamed, "Local girl vanishes from Bellman apartment. No clues." The article detailed the disappearance of a 7-year-old girl named Lily Hart from apartment 3B, the very unit next to his. Her mother, Evelyn Hart, a single parent, claimed Lily had disappeared from her room during the night. The window locked from the inside, the door chained from inside. No signs of forced entry, no ransom note, no body. The police investigation had been extensive but yielded nothing. The case went cold. Evelyn was eventually institutionalized after she began insisting, with increasing fervor, that Lily was taken by the walls. Apartment 3B was sealed shortly after, declared uninhabitable due to extensive water damage. A convenient lie, Mark now suspected. Mark's skin crawled. He looked up the old blueprints of the building, found in a forgotten folder in the archives. His apartment, 3A, was a mirror image of 3B. He traced the layout, his finger hovering over the shared wall. There was a section of 3B that, according to the blueprints, should have been a small storage closet, but it didn't align with the exterior walls or the adjacent units. It was an anomaly, a space that didn't quite fit. That night, he stared at the wall for a long time, the faint floral pattern of the wallpaper suddenly seeming sinister, like a mask. The whispers began, soft at first, then coalescing into something more distinct, more urgent. A child's voice, clear as a bell, though muffled by plaster and decades. "Help me." His blood turned to ice. He knew he was no longer imagining things. He knew what he had to do. The next day, driven by a desperate, almost manic curiosity, he broke in. The door to 3B was sealed from the outside with heavy-duty locks and metal plates, a desperate attempt to contain whatever lay within. But the locks were old, rusted. He bought a cheap lock-picking set online, watched a YouTube tutorial, and with trembling hands, worked at the tumblers. The clicks were agonizingly loud in the silent hallway. Finally, with a soft thunk, the lock gave way. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with the scent of dust, decay, and something else, something cloying and sweet, like old potpourri mixed with sorrow. The furniture had been covered with white sheets that had turned gray with time, ghostly shrouds over forgotten lives. A child's room stood frozen in time. A small, iron-framed bed, a wooden rocking horse covered in cobwebs, a scattering of faded, antique toys. And the wallpaper, a cheerful pattern of dancing bears, was peeling in long, curling strips like desiccated skin, revealing the rough plaster beneath. The closet door, surprisingly, was slightly ajar. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs as he pushed it open fully. Inside, a small, dark space. Not a closet, not really. It was a crawl space. It led behind the walls, narrow, dark, lined with old, crumbling insulation and forgotten wiring. The space ran the length of the apartment, directly behind the wall where he had been hearing the whispers. It was a hidden passage, a secret artery within the very bones of the building. He shone his phone's flashlight into the gloom. The beam cut through the thick dust motes dancing in the air, and there, scratched roughly into the wooden beams, as if by a desperate hand, was one word: Lily. Mark didn't call the police. Not yet. What would he even say? "I broke into a sealed apartment, found a secret crawl space, and now I think a ghost child is talking to me through the walls." They'd send him to the same institution as Evelyn Hart. Instead, he kept digging, his investigation becoming a frantic, solitary obsession. He spent days at the library, poring over microfiches of old newspaper articles, searching for any mention of the Hart family, any detail missed in the initial reports. He found Lily's school records, a faded photo of her class. He even managed to track down some of Evelyn Hart's therapy notes from her hospitalization, illegally, through a sympathetic contact at a local historical society who had access to restricted archives. Evelyn's notes were a descent into madness, but amidst the rambling, a terrifying pattern emerged. She claimed that her daughter, Lily, had always been a solitary child, prone to imaginary friends. But then, the imaginary friend became real. Lily talked to the walls, said the walls promised her a secret place, said she would never be lonely if she went. The walls took her. Evelyn had scrawled in her journal, her handwriting growing increasingly erratic. She followed the whispers, and now she's somewhere I can't reach. They whisper to me now, too. They want me to join her. They want us all to be part of the silence. Mark felt a cold dread seep into his bones. The whispers weren't just a phenomenon. They were a lure. The next night, he sat in the dark, facing the wall, the silence of his apartment broken only by his own ragged breathing. "Lily," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Are you still here?" Silence. A profound, heavy silence that stretched, interminable. Then a soft thump behind the wall, like something light falling. A breathy giggle, faint but unmistakable. And then, the words, clear as if she were standing beside him, though muffled by plaster. "You found me." His blood turned to ice. He scrambled back, knocking over his bedside lamp. The words, the giggle, they were too real, too close. The next few days blurred into a waking nightmare. Mark barely ate, subsisting on stale coffee and the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He stopped taking work calls, his clients growing increasingly frustrated. He became a wraith, pale, sleep-deprived, muttering to himself, his eyes constantly darting towards the wall. He scoured every inch of the crawl space, looking for a door, a hatch, anything that could explain Lily's disappearance, anything that could be a physical portal to this secret place. But there was nothing but dust and echoes, the faint, sweet scent of decay, and the ever-present, growing chorus of whispers. One night, while pacing his apartment, a frantic energy possessing him, he felt a slight give beneath his bare foot, a loose floorboard beneath his bed. He knelt, his fingers fumbling, and pried it up. Underneath it, nestled in the dust, was a small, tarnished tin box. His heart pounded. Inside, he found a lock of fine, light brown hair, tied with a faded ribbon. A child's lock. A faded Polaroid photograph of Lily, her pale face and dark eyes looking out with an uneasy, almost frightened smile. Her arms were wrapped around someone who wasn't Evelyn, a tall, shadowy man, his face obscured by a trick of the light or perhaps deliberately blurred, but his presence was unsettling. And a folded letter, brittle with age. It read, "To my dearest Lily, my brave little bird. I know you hear them. I know they promise you wonders. But the door is never truly closed. They listen. She listens. She's still listening. Don't tell anyone. Protect the secret. The walls have eyes, and ears, and hungry mouths. The door is never truly closed." The letter was unsigned, but the handwriting was elegant, educated, unlike Evelyn's frantic scrawl. Who had written this? And what did it mean? The walls have hungry mouths? Mark's health declined rapidly. He wasn't eating. His clothes hung loose on his gaunt frame. His skin was sallow, his eyes sunken and bloodshot, constantly darting, as if searching for something unseen. He was pale, sleep-deprived, muttering to himself, arguing with the air. He became utterly obsessed with the wall, with the crawl space, with the tin box and its chilling contents. Every night, the chorus of voices grew louder, more distinct. Not just Lily, but others. Dozens of voices. Some begged. Some laughed, a high, chilling sound. Some warned, their words fragmented, desperate. "Don't trust them. It's a trap. Join us. Never leave." He started carving. With a small knife he'd found in the kitchen, he began to meticulously scrape away the wallpaper, then the plaster, revealing the rough wooden laths and beams beneath. He worked compulsively, driven by an unseen force, driven by the whispers that now filled his waking hours as well as his nights. He was searching for something, a pattern, a hidden mechanism, a truth embedded in the very structure of the building. The landlord, Mr. Abernathy, eventually tried to evict him. He'd received complaints from other tenants about strange noises, about the constant scratching, about a pervasive, cloying smell emanating from Mark's unit. But by then, it was too late. Mark refused to answer the door, refused to leave. He was trapped, not by physical bars, but by the insidious grip of the building's secrets. Neighbors reported strange smells, damp earth, old dust, and something indescribably metallic. They spoke of flickering lights in Mark's windows at all hours, and a sound like frantic, scratching nails coming from his unit, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the Bellman building. When the police finally forced their way in, after days of unanswered calls and the growing concern of his sister, Sarah, who had driven all the way from the city, the apartment was empty. The furniture overturned, as if a violent struggle had taken place, or as if something had burst forth from within. Dozens of notes, scrawled in Mark's increasingly frantic hand, were pinned to the walls with kitchen knives, their blades glinting ominously in the harsh police flashlights. They spoke of the walls, of Lily, of the hungry mouths, of the door that is never truly closed. And in the middle of the room, stark and terrifying, a large section of plaster had been carved away, revealing the raw wood underneath. The beams were covered in names, meticulously carved, one after another. Lily's, Evelyn's, and Mark's, but no sign of Mark. No body, no blood, no struggle, just the cold, empty apartment, and the lingering whisper, a sound only the truly attuned could hear, echoing from the exposed wood. Closer. The police investigation into Mark Ellison's disappearance mirrored Lily Hart's. No leads, no evidence, just a chilling void. Sarah, Mark's sister, refused to accept it. She moved into a nearby motel, determined to uncover the truth. She found the tin box, the letter, the Polaroid. The shadowy man in the photo haunted her. She showed it to the police, but they dismissed it as an old, blurry photo. Sarah, however, had a different instinct. She hired a private investigator, a retired detective named Frank Miller, who had a reputation for taking on cold cases no one else would touch. Miller, a gruff man with tired eyes, listened patiently to Sarah's story, his skepticism slowly eroding as she presented the evidence. The journal, the blueprint anomaly, the eerie echoes of Lily's disappearance. Miller's investigation focused on the building's history. He dug into the Bellman building's original construction records from the early 1900s. The architect, a reclusive and eccentric man named Alastair Finch, had designed the building with unusual specifications, including a complex system of ventilation shafts and hidden passages, ostensibly for maintenance. But Miller found a curious detail. Finch had a single, unlisted child, a daughter named Alara, who had died mysteriously in the building at the age of 7, just a year after its completion. The official cause was a childhood illness, but there were no medical records to support it. Miller found a hidden compartment in Finch's old desk in the city archives. Inside, a second, more personal journal. Finch's entries were increasingly disturbed. He spoke of the voices in the walls, of the perfect resonance, of building a structure that could contain and amplify the unseen. He believed he had discovered a way to tap into a spiritual dimension, a place where souls lingered. He had designed the Bellman building as a grand, intricate trap. Alara, his daughter, had been his first test subject. He had encouraged her to play in the hidden passages, to listen to the whispers, to become one with the building. Her death, he wrote, was not a death, but a transition. He had sealed her within the walls, believing her spirit would animate the structure, making it a living conduit to the other side. The shadowy man in Lily's photo, Sarah realized with a sickening lurch, was Alastair Finch. He had returned to the building decades later, perhaps drawn by the lingering energy, perhaps to find another subject. He had befriended Lily, encouraged her to listen, to enter the hidden spaces. He had manipulated Evelyn, making her believe the walls were alive. And he had done the same to Mark. Sarah and Miller confronted the current landlord, Mr. Abernathy, with Finch's journal. Abernathy, terrified, confessed. His grandfather had been Finch's apprentice, and the family had secretly maintained the building, knowing its true purpose. They were caretakers of a living tomb, too afraid to break the cycle. He revealed that the crawl space Mark had found was just one part of a vast, intricate network of hidden passages, air ducts, and hollow spaces that permeated the entire building, designed to channel sound and energy. Finch had even built small, sound-dampened chambers within the walls, accessible only through cleverly disguised panels. These were the secret places the Whispers promised. The police, armed with Miller's findings and Abernathy's confession, finally launched a full-scale investigation. They used specialized equipment to map the hidden passages. What they found was horrifying. Not just Lily's and Mark's names, but dozens of names carved into the inner walls of the building, some dating back to the early 20th century. Names of other missing persons, forgotten over time, their disappearances attributed to runaways or accidents. The Bellman building was a silent predator, a monument to a madman's obsession. They found no bodies, no remains. The passages were empty, save for dust and the lingering, chilling scent of decay. It was as if the building had truly consumed them. Sarah, however, refused to give up on Mark. She believed he was still in there, somewhere. She and Miller returned to the building, now a crime scene. As they walked through Mark's apartment, the exposed wooden beams with his name carved into them, Sarah felt a profound coldness. She listened, straining her ears. The whispers were gone. The building was silent. But then, a faint, almost imperceptible hum from the exposed wall. It wasn't a whisper. It was a resonance, a vibration. Sarah touched the wood. It was cold, but alive. "He's not gone," she whispered to Miller. "He's part of it." They found a final, hidden panel behind a loose brick in the fireplace, leading to a deeper, smaller chamber, barely big enough for one person. It was empty, but on the floor, etched into the concrete, was a single, chilling message. The door is never truly closed. Welcome home. Today, the Bellman building still stands in Greystone. It was eventually condemned and slated for demolition, but strange legal battles and unforeseen structural issues have kept it standing, a silent, imposing sentinel on the town's main street. The unit remains sealed, its windows dark, its secrets locked within its thick walls. The story of Alastair Finch and his macabre architectural masterpiece became a local legend, a chilling tale whispered in hushed tones. The missing persons cases were reopened, their fates now attributed to the building's sinister design. But sometimes, tenants in nearby apartments report strange sounds at night. Faint humming, a low, resonant vibration that seems to come from the very ground beneath their feet. Whispers, soft and indistinct, carried on the wind. And a faint, almost imperceptible tapping from inside the walls of the condemned building, like someone trying to get out. Or perhaps trying to get in. When the new maintenance man, a young, skeptical recruit, was sent in to inspect the exterior of 3B, he came out after 10 minutes, pale, sweating, and shaking. He refused to go back. He wouldn't say what he saw or what he heard. Only this, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not just a room. It's a door. And I think they're still opening it." The Bellman building waits. And the whispers, for those who are willing to listen, continue. They are the echoes of a madman's legacy, the trapped voices of the lost, and the insidious invitation to those who are drawn to the secrets hidden within the very fabric of their homes. Story 3. The Phantom's Letter. It started with a single envelope, unassuming in its simplicity, yet destined to unravel the carefully constructed facade of Danforth Heights. Monday morning. Pale yellow, the color of aged parchment. No return address, no postmark beyond a generic city stamp. Thick, expensive paper, hinting at a sender who valued discretion and quality. Elegant cursive handwriting, a flowing script that seemed to mock the chaos it was about to unleash, adorned the front. 2. Councilman James Harlan, for your eyes only. James Harlan, a pillar of the Danforth Heights establishment, a man whose political career spanned 3 decades and whose face was synonymous with civic pride, opened it in his opulent office without a second thought. He assumed it was another anonymous complaint, a disgruntled constituent, or perhaps a clumsy attempt at blackmail from a low-level operative. Inside, however, was not a demand for money or a political threat. It was a single sheet of cream-colored paper, faintly scented with something floral, lilac, perhaps, or jasmine, a subtle, almost feminine touch that was deeply unsettling given the message. The text was short, precise, and devastating. I know what happened in 1994. I know who paid whom. I know where the body is. The phantom, attached, clipped neatly to the bottom of the page, was a photograph, grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. A patch of freshly turned dirt in a wooded area, and glinting in the faint sunlight, half buried, a familiar gold cufflink. The very cufflink Harlan had lost during that frantic, desperate night in the autumn of '94. The night everything changed. Harlan went pale, his breath catching in his throat. His hand, clutching the letter, began to tremble. He had a massive coronary event that afternoon, collapsing at his desk. He was rushed to the hospital, his condition critical. The official story was stress. The unofficial story, whispered in hushed tones among the city's elite, was fear. The next letter arrived 3 days later, this time addressed to State Senator Trudy Langley, a woman known for her steely resolve and impenetrable public persona. Similar envelope, similar handwriting. Inside, not a photo, but a meticulously compiled list of names and dates. Trudy's secret ledger, undeclared campaign donations, funds rerouted through a labyrinth of shell companies, offshore accounts, and phantom charities. A financial empire built on illicit dealings. Trudy Langley's publicist announced her immediate resignation, citing unforeseen personal health issues. By the end of the week, 5 more letters had gone out, all to powerful people in the city. The chief of police, a prominent real estate developer, the head of the city's largest construction firm, a respected judge, and even the editor-in-chief of the rival Danforth Daily. Each letter contained a specific, damning secret, a carefully chosen vulnerability designed to inflict maximum damage. All signed, The Phantom. Panic, a cold, insidious dread, began to spread like wildfire among the city's elite. Who was this phantom? How did they know? And what did they want? The city, usually so predictable in its corruption, was gripped by an invisible terror. Claire Devon, a 42-year-old investigative journalist, had seen this kind of paranoia before, just never so theatrical. She'd been working for the Danforth City Ledger for over a decade, a tenacious reporter with a nose for corruption and a relentless pursuit of the truth. Most recently, she'd been freelancing after the paper went digital and gutted its staff, a casualty of the changing media landscape. But the passion remained. She lived for corruption stories, whistleblowers, secrets, the hidden machinery that truly ran the city. When she first heard about the Phantom through one of her City Hall sources, a nervous, chain-smoking clerk named Martha who had seen the fear in Harlan's eyes, Claire was intrigued. It sounded like a rogue operation, a lone wolf with access to deep, dark secrets. She started making calls, digging into the backgrounds of the targets, looking for any common threads. Then she got a letter herself. It arrived on a Sunday morning, tucked discreetly into her mailbox, looking innocuous amidst the junk mail. No note, just a photograph, grainy, slightly faded, but instantly recognizable. Her, 12 years ago, leaving the office of a man later charged with insider trading, a notorious corporate fraudster named Arthur Jenkins. She remembered the meeting vividly. It had been off the record, a desperate plea from Jenkins to delay a story, offering her exclusive access to a bigger scandal if she held back. She never published a word about that specific meeting, choosing instead to pursue the larger story he hinted at, which ultimately led to his downfall. She had protected his confidence, even if it meant a temporary ethical gray area. And yet, there it was. Proof she had once protected someone she probably shouldn't have. Proof that the Phantom knew her secrets too. Claire didn't scare easily. She'd received death threats, been doxxed, and had her apartment broken into by angry politicians. But this was different. This was personal. This was intimate. Who was the Phantom? How did they know all this? And why were they only sending letters, elegant, handwritten, sealed with wax, like something out of a Victorian mystery novel? It felt like a performance, a deliberate, slow-burn terror campaign. Claire knew she couldn't ignore it. This wasn't just a story, it was a challenge, and she was going to meet it head-on. Word of the letters, initially contained within the city's upper echelons, began to leak. First, a hushed rumor in a coffee shop. Then, a cryptic post on a local blog. Soon, it was front-page news. Publicly, the city administration, led by a visibly strained Mayor Thompson, denied any such threats, dismissing them as baseless rumors and political smear tactics. Privately, panic spread like a virus. A quiet war began. Officials hired private security details, deleted incriminating files from their computers, scrubbed their digital histories, and even attempted to physically destroy old paper records. At least two prominent figures, a city councilor and the head of the zoning commission, resigned for personal reasons within days of receiving their letters. One, a particularly corrupt former police chief, vanished completely, fleeing to Europe under the cover of night. The city was a powder keg, and the Phantom was striking the matches. Claire, using her extensive network of contacts, dug deeper. She spent hours in dimly lit cafes, meeting nervous informants. She haunted the city archives, poring over dusty files. Patterns began to emerge. Everyone who received a letter had ties to the same circle of influence, a powerful cabal that had dominated Danforth Heights for decades. Their common thread led back to a specific event, a real estate scandal in the late 1990s involving illegal evictions, arson for insurance schemes that raised entire blocks, and falsified contracts that drove dozens of low-income families out of the East Side neighborhood, paving the way for lucrative new developments. No one had ever been convicted. The paper trail had gone cold, or, more accurately, been torched in the very fires that had consumed the East Side. Some journalists, including Claire in her early career, had speculated about the case for years, but the evidence had always been just out of reach, buried under layers of bureaucracy and intimidation. Until now, Claire spoke to a former city archivist, a wizened old man named Mr. Henderson, recently diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's, but still lucid at times. He recalled someone, a young man, quiet, sharp, with an intensity in his eyes, who had visited the archive room weekly in the early 2000s. He always asked about the East Side redevelopment plans. Claire felt a jolt. Elias. She had a lead. A real one. The name Elias, or Ellis, became Claire's new obsession. She spent weeks sifting through databases, cross-referencing names, dates, and addresses. It was painstaking work, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a growing sense of urgency. Finally, she found him, Elias Grant, a foster child, raised in the very East Side neighborhood that had been decimated by the fires. His small, rented home had been one of the first to burn down in the so-called redevelopment fires, of 1997. His foster parents, a kind elderly couple who had taken him in after his own parents died, perished in the blaze. Elias, then just 13, had been at a school trip. He returned to ashes and loss. Claire traced his last known employment, a city records scanning contractor in 2006, an outsourced role that had given him unrestricted access to thousands of archived files, including, presumably, all the sealed documents related to the East Side fires and the financial dealings of the city's powerful elite. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying precision. If the Phantom was real, Elias Grant fit the profile perfectly. A victim with a motive, a brilliant mind, and the means to gather the very secrets he was now exposing. She drove to his last known address listed in a 2005 utility bill. The neighborhood had been completely transformed. The old, dilapidated apartment building was long gone, replaced by gleaming, soulless condos. But in the nearby alley, behind a forgotten dumpster, carved faintly into the weathered wood of an old telephone pole, she found a symbol. A capital P with a single, defiant line slashed through it. The Phantom's mark. A chilling confirmation. Claire returned home that night, exhausted but exhilarated. She had found him, or at least, she had found his ghost. She unlocked her apartment door, her mind still racing, already planning her next steps. But as she stepped inside, she noticed something was wrong. The door was slightly ajar. She always locked it. Her heart leaped into her throat. She moved cautiously, her hand instinctively reaching for the heavy iron poker by the fireplace. Nothing seemed amiss. No signs of forced entry. No valuables missing. Except one. From her desk, the file folder labeled East Side Fires, Witness Interviews. It was gone. In its place, neatly centered on her blotter, was a letter, not in an envelope, just a single sheet of cream-colored paper, sealed with a familiar wax stamp. She picked it up, her fingers trembling. The elegant cursive was unmistakable. "You're getting close, Claire, but some truths aren't ready to be told. Not by you." The Phantom. A cold dread washed over her. He wasn't just watching. He was inside her home. He was playing a game, and he had just upped the stakes. Claire went public. The Phantom had crossed a line, a personal boundary that ignited a fierce, righteous anger within her. She couldn't be silenced, not now. In a searing op-ed for the online Danforth Observer, she published a piece titled, "The Phantom is Real, and We Let This Happen." She laid out everything she had, the letters, the names of the implicated officials, though she held back some of the most damning details, the photo of Elias Grant, and the city's buried past of the East Side fires. She didn't name every recipient, not yet, but hinted that more names and more damning evidence would be revealed if the corruption continued, if the city refused to acknowledge its complicity. The story exploded. It went viral within hours, picked up by national news outlets. Half the city hailed the Phantom as a vigilante, a hero exposing the rot at the heart of their government. Others called him a domestic terrorist, a dangerous anarchist threatening the social order. Some demanded immediate arrests. Others demanded a statue. The public was fiercely divided, and the debate raged in every coffee shop, every online forum, every city council meeting. Mayor Thompson, his face a mask of barely concealed panic, called a press conference. His statements were vague, evasive, filled with platitudes about transparency and justice, but his eyes darted nervously, betraying his fear. He promised investigations, but offered no concrete action. That night, someone firebombed Claire's car. It was parked 2 blocks from her apartment, a deliberate message. The flames lit up the night sky, a stark, violent punctuation mark to the Phantom's campaign. Claire watched from her window, a grim determination setting in. This wasn't just about exposing secrets anymore. It was a war. And the next morning, every single city council member, every judge, every police captain, and every prominent developer in Danforth Heights received another letter. Each contained a different message, tailored to their specific fears, their unique vulnerabilities. But all of them ended the same way, scrawled in that elegant, chilling cursive. You cannot silence what has already spoken. You cannot bury what has already been unearthed. I am not one. I am many. The Phantom. The message sent a fresh wave of terror through the city's elite. It wasn't just Elias Grant. It was a network, an ideology, a collective will. The Phantom was everywhere, nowhere, an omnipresent threat that could strike at any moment. Weeks passed, stretching into months. The initial flurry of investigations opened, then quietly stalled, hampered by political interference, lack of concrete evidence, and the sheer elusiveness of the Phantom. Claire, however, became a lightning rod. She was contacted by dozens of whistleblowers, ex-staffers, and victims of past cover-ups, each with their own piece of the puzzle, their own tale of corruption and injustice. A patchwork of pain and evidence, slowly but surely, began to form a coherent narrative of systemic rot. She published follow-up articles, exposing more names, more schemes, forcing the city's hand. Then, without warning, the letters stopped. No more messages, no more threats, no more dramatic revelations. The city held its breath, waiting for the next shoe to drop. But it never did. The silence was almost worse than the threats. It was the silence of a predator, waiting, watching, perhaps planning its next move. Claire never found Elias Grant. Despite her best efforts, he remained a ghost, a legend. No recent sightings, no digital footprint. It was as if he had simply dissolved back into the shadows from which he had emerged. But once, months after the last letter, in a crowded subway station during rush hour, she swore she saw him. A man watching her from across the platform, hood up, face in shadow, a faint, almost imperceptible scar along his jawline. He wasn't moving towards her, wasn't threatening, just watching. He caught her eye, and then a flicker of a smile, a brief, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement, and then he turned, disappearing into the surging crowd, a phantom once more. She never saw him again. The city, though shaken, slowly began to heal. The fear subsided, replaced by a grudging acceptance of the truths that had been exposed. The mayor, his reputation in tatters, announced he would not seek re-election. New faces emerged, promising reform. The I am many message continued to haunt Claire. Was it a bluff? Or was Elias Grant merely the visible tip of a much larger, unseen organization? She began to consider the possibility that the Phantom wasn't a single person, but a collective, a decentralized network of individuals, each with their own grievances against the corrupt elite, each contributing their piece of the puzzle. This would explain the breadth of knowledge, the meticulous detail in each letter, and the ability to disappear without a trace. She started looking for patterns not in the content of the letters, but in their delivery. Who had access to all these high-profile individuals? Who could slip a letter into a private office, a secure home, a senator's briefcase? It pointed to people within the system, but those who were overlooked, invisible. Mailroom clerks, delivery drivers, low-level administrative assistants. The very people whose lives had been most impacted by the corruption. Claire wrote a new series of articles exploring the concept of citizen justice and the power of collective action in the digital age. She argued that the Phantom was a symptom, not the disease, a manifestation of a public fed up with systemic corruption. She became a voice for accountability, a champion for the marginalized. The city, slowly but surely, began to change. The public demanded more transparency. New laws were passed, making it harder for officials to hide their dealings. The old guard, shaken by the Phantom's campaign, began to retire, replaced by a younger, more idealistic generation. Claire, however, never stopped looking over her shoulder. The firebombing of her car was a stark reminder that some enemies were very real, very physical. She installed security cameras, changed her routines, but the sense of being watched never truly left her. It wasn't a paranoid delusion, it was a sharpened awareness. The phantom, or the idea of the phantom, had fundamentally altered her perception of the world. She realized that the phantom's greatest weapon wasn't just the secrets they exposed, but the fear they instilled and the hope they ignited. They had shown the city that even the most powerful could be held accountable. And that knowledge, that belief, was far more potent than any single letter. A year later, the city council, under immense public pressure and a new, more progressive mayor, passed the Historical Accountability Act, opening sealed records from the 1990s, specifically those related to the East Side fires. The truth, finally, began to trickle out. 6 officials were indicted. 2 confessed, their careers and reputations shattered. The city began a long, painful process of healing and reform. The phantom was never officially identified. Elias Grant remained a ghost. But Claire still receives letters. Not the threatening kind anymore. Now, they are just blank pages, each sealed with wax and delivered without a return address. They arrive sporadically, sometimes once a month, sometimes every few months. Each time, she opens them slowly, her heart thrumming with a mixture of apprehension and understanding. She knows full well what they mean, that someone is still watching, still listening, and still writing. The phantom is not a person. The phantom is an idea that lives in the shadows, a silent promise that no secret is truly safe, no corruption truly hidden. And in Danforth Heights, the whispers of justice, once confined to elegant letters, now echo in the very fabric of the city, a constant reminder that even in the darkest corners, there are eyes watching and hands ready to expose the truth. Thank you for joining me tonight on Bedtime Noir. If these stories kept you company, or gave you something to think about as you drifted off, consider liking the video and subscribing for more haunting tales crafted to calm the mind and stir the imagination. If you're still awake, let me know which story stayed with you most and what time it is where you're watching. I read every comment. Until next time, sleep well. And remember, sometimes the silence speaks louder than the noise.